Dollar Tree just quietly rolled out its back-to-school lineup, and if you've walked into a store in the last week or two, you've probably already noticed the signs posted along certain aisles warning shoppers to grab things before they're gone. This isn't the usual seasonal rotation either. Store employees have been restocking specific sections daily, and several of the organization and school supply items that came in this month are already showing gaps on the shelf less than 2 weeks after arriving. I spent the better part of an afternoon going through every single school-related aisle to figure out exactly which of these new arrivals are worth grabbing immediately and which ones you can safely wait on. 12 items stood out as genuinely worth your attention, including one locker organization piece that's apparently been restocked 3 times already this month alone because it keeps selling out. Stick around until the end, because the last item on this list is the one a store employee specifically told me to grab before the weekend, since their next shipment isn't expected for almost another month. Before I get into the list itself, I want to mention how I actually put this together, because I think it matters for how much you trust the urgency here. I visited 3 different store locations over 2 days, talked to whichever employee happened to be restocking shelves at the time, and specifically asked about restock frequency rather than just guessing based on how empty a shelf looked on a single visit. That distinction turned out to matter a lot, because a couple of items looked low on the shelf simply due to messy organization rather than actual scarcity, while others were genuinely down to their last few units with no clear restock date in sight. Number 1. The Locker Organization Bin Set. This is the item employees mentioned selling out the fastest, and once you see it, it's easy to understand why. At $1.25 each, these stackable mesh bins are designed specifically to fit standard school locker dimensions, giving students a way to separate binders, folders, and loose supplies instead of everything sliding into one messy pile at the bottom of the locker. Comparable locker organization sets at office supply stores or big box retailers typically run $8 to $15 for a similar stackable set, so the price difference here is significant. The mesh material is sturdier than you might expect at this price point, holding its shape well even when packed with heavier textbooks. The one thing worth knowing is that locker dimensions do vary slightly between schools, so it's worth checking your specific locker size before buying multiples, since a bin that's slightly too large simply won't fit no matter how good the price is. Store employees recommended buying one first to test the fit before grabbing enough for a full stacking system. For families with more than one student in school, this is the item most likely to be gone by the time you make a second trip. So if the fit works for your school, buying now rather than waiting is the safer move. One employee mentioned that the store had already reordered this specific bin set 3 separate times since the back-to-school section went up, which for a single item that early in the season is a pretty clear signal of just how quickly it's moving off the shelf compared to everything else in that aisle. Up next is a small item that solves one of the most common daily headaches for younger students. Number 2. Clear zippered pencil pouches. These show up every single back-to-school season, but this year's version at $1.25 includes a sturdier zipper track than in previous years, based on comparing it to ones I remember from past seasons. Store brand or licensed character versions of similar pouches at office supply retailers typically cost $4 to $6, mostly due to branding rather than any real difference in function. The clear front panel is genuinely useful beyond just looking organized, since teachers and parents can quickly see what's inside without unzipping it, which matters more than people expect when a student is rushing to find a specific pencil or eraser in a crowded backpack. The main limitation is durability. Under heavy daily zipping and unzipping over a full school year, the zipper pull itself is a slightly thinner material than pricier alternatives, so it's worth being gentle when zipping rather than yanking it closed. For elementary and middle school students specifically, where pouches get tossed in and out of backpacks constantly, this remains one of the best value items in the entire school supply lineup. I grabbed 3 different colors specifically to compare zipper smoothness across units from the same batch, and all 3 performed consistently, which suggests the zipper quality issue some cheaper pouches have in other seasons doesn't seem to be a problem with this particular batch. The next item is one that quietly disappeared from several nearby store locations within days of restocking. Number 3. 2 pocket folders with brad fasteners. At 25 cents each, buying in bulk here is almost a no-brainer for any parent managing a multi-subject school schedule. Big box retailers sell nearly identical folders for 50 cents to $1 each, so buying 10 or 12 of these here instead can save real money once you're covering every subject for the school year. The brad fasteners hold hole-punched paper securely, and the pocket capacity is genuinely on par with pricier versions, holding a reasonable stack of worksheets without the pocket seams splitting the way some ultra-cheap folders do. The one thing to watch for is color availability. Since the popular solid colors, the ones most schools ask for specifically by name for certain subjects, tend to sell out first, leaving mostly patterned or less common colors behind after a week or two. If your school has a specific color coding system for folders, it's worth buying those exact colors early in the season rather than assuming you can grab them later. For the sheer volume needed across multiple subjects, this remains one of the best bulk buys in the entire back-to-school lineup. I actually watched another shopper grab a stack of a dozen red folders specifically while I was in the aisle, mentioning to me unprompted that her kid's school required red for math specifically, which is exactly the kind of situation where waiting even a week or two can mean settling for a less convenient color simply because the popular ones are gone. Moving on to an item that surprised me with how much it's actually improved compared to previous years. Number 4. Wide-ruled composition notebooks. At $1.25, these are already a back-to-school staple, but this year's paper quality felt noticeably less prone to ink bleed-through compared to versions from a couple years ago, based on quickly testing one with a standard ballpoint pen in store. Office supply and big box versions of a similar page count typically cost $2 to $3 each, so buying several here, instead of at a pricier retailer, adds up to meaningful savings across a full course load. The cardboard cover is sturdier than the thinnest ultra-budget notebooks you sometimes see elsewhere, holding up reasonably well to being tossed in and out of a backpack daily. The binding is stitched rather than simply glued, which matters for durability since glued bindings tend to shed pages by mid-year under heavy daily use. If there's one thing to be mindful of, it's that the exact page count can vary slightly between shipments, so if your teacher has specified an exact page count requirement, it's worth double-checking before buying a large batch all at once. For general note-taking across most subjects, this remains a genuinely strong value purchase for the price. I actually tested this by writing a full page with a standard ballpoint and holding it up to a light afterward, and the bleed-through was minimal enough that using both sides of most pages remained perfectly legible, which isn't always something you can say confidently about the cheapest notebooks on a shelf. The next item is one that store employees specifically flagged as being restocked more frequently than almost anything else in the aisle. Number 5. Multi-packs of glue sticks. A pack of 6 runs $1.25, and these get requested constantly on elementary school supply lists, often in fairly large quantities per student. Big box retailers sell a comparable 6-pack for $2 to $3, so the savings here compound quickly if you're buying for multiple kids or contributing extra to a classroom supply pool, which many elementary teachers specifically ask families to do at the start of the year. The glue application is smooth and dries clear without the streaky white residue that some ultra-cheap glue sticks leave behind on darker paper. The main limitation is that the stick itself is slightly narrower than some pricier brands, meaning younger kids with less developed fine motor control may go through them a bit faster than a thicker stick designed with tiny hands specifically in mind. For general classroom use and typical craft projects, this remains one of the easiest bulk buys to justify on this entire list. Up next is an item where I'd actually recommend a bit of extra caution before buying multiples. Number 6. Kid-safe scissors with blunt tips. At $1.25, these meet the basic safety requirement most elementary schools list for classroom scissors: blunt rounded tips designed to prevent accidental pokes during normal classroom use. Big box and office supply versions of similarly rated scissors run $2 to $4, so there's a real savings opportunity here for families needing multiples across several kids or grade levels. That said, the cutting blade itself is noticeably less sharp than pricier alternatives, which is by design for safety, but it does mean cutting through thicker cardstock or craft foam can require more effort and more attempts than a slightly higher grade pair would need. For basic paper cutting tasks, typical of most elementary classrooms, they perform completely adequately. For older students working on more detailed craft projects requiring precision cutting through thicker materials, it may be worth supplementing with one sharper pair at home specifically for those tougher projects, while keeping the budget scissors for everyday classroom use. The next item is one of the more unexpectedly well-reviewed additions to this year's back-to-school lineup. Number 7. Insulated water bottles designed to fit standard backpack side pockets. At $1.50, this is one of the more surprising values on the entire list, since insulated bottles at this price point are relatively rare even within a dollar store's typical inventory. Big box retailers sell comparable insulated bottles specifically sized for backpack pockets, anywhere from $6 to $12 depending on the design. The insulation genuinely keeps cold water cold through a normal school day, based on my own test leaving one filled overnight in a bag, though it's worth noting the insulation performance is a step below premium insulated bottle brands specifically marketed for all-day temperature retention. The screw-top lid seals securely enough to avoid leaking in a backpack during normal daily use, though tossing it in fully upside down for extended periods is where I'd be a bit more cautious. For students who consistently lose or damage water bottles throughout the school year, having a couple of these on hand as low-cost backups makes a lot of practical sense rather than worrying about a pricier bottle getting lost or damaged early in the year. I'd honestly recommend grabbing at least 2 per kid right from the start of the year for exactly this reason, since replacing a lost water bottle mid-semester with whatever happens to still be in stock is a much worse position to be in than simply having a spare ready to go from day one. Moving on to a lunch-related item that quietly solves a very specific, very common problem. Number 8. Small bento-style lunch containers with built-in dividers. At $1.50, these separate different food items without needing multiple smaller containers, which is exactly the kind of practical solution that makes packing a varied lunch faster on a busy weekday morning. Big box retailers sell comparable divided lunch containers for $4 to $8, depending on the brand and design. The divider walls are sturdier than expected, holding their shape well even when the container is fairly full, and the lid seals well enough to prevent most cross-contamination between compartments during a normal commute in a lunch bag. The main thing to watch for is that these aren't specifically rated for hot foods or microwave use in most cases, so they work best for cold lunch items, sandwiches, fruit, cut vegetables, rather than anything meant to be reheated at school. For families packing primarily cold lunches, this is a genuinely useful addition that simplifies morning routine without a significant cost. I picked one up specifically to test the seal by filling each compartment with a different liquid-adjacent food, yogurt in one section, sliced fruit in another, and carrying it in a bag on its side for a few hours. And nothing leaked between compartments, which is honestly more than I expected going in, given how thin some of the plastic felt in hand. The next item is a small personal care essential that back-to-school shopping lists frequently overlook until the very last minute. Number 9. Travel-size hand sanitizer bottles. At $1.25 for a multi-pack, these are specifically sized to fit in a pencil pouch or a small backpack pocket without taking up much room, which matters more than people realize when packing a bag that already needs to fit a full day's worth of school supplies. Big box retailers sell a comparable multi-pack for $2 to $4. The sanitizer formula performs identically to pricier versions in terms of basic effectiveness, since the core active ingredient and concentration requirements are standardized regardless of brand or price point. The only real consideration is scent strength. Some of these have a noticeably stronger fragrance than unscented alternatives, which is worth checking if your child or their classroom has any specific sensitivity to strong scents. For general daily use throughout a school year, this remains one of the simplest, most practical bulk buys on the entire list. It's easy to overlook this specific item entirely while focused on bigger ticket things like backpacks and notebooks, but I'd honestly recommend adding a multi-pack of these to your cart even if it wasn't originally on your list, since running out mid-semester means either a specific extra errand just for this one item or going without for a stretch of time, neither of which is a great option once the school year is already in full swing. Up next is an item that consistently sells out first among the writing supplies specifically. Number 10. Multi-packs of highlighters and fine tip markers. At $1.25 for a pack of 8, this covers most color coding and note-taking needs for a typical student without needing to buy separate smaller packs of each color. Big box retailers sell comparable 8-packs for $3 to $5 depending on the specific brand and tip style. The ink flow is consistent across most of the pack. though I did notice one or two individual markers in a couple of packs I tested ran slightly drier than the rest, which is a common quality control variance you'll sometimes see with bulk multi-packs regardless of where you buy them. For general highlighting and note-taking throughout a school year, the value here is hard to beat, especially for students who go through highlighters quickly during exam preparation periods. If you do notice a dry marker in your specific pack, most stores are usually fine with a quick exchange at the register if you catch it before leaving, so it's worth doing a quick test swipe on the packaging itself, where a small clear test strip is often included, before you even get to the checkout line. The next item is one specifically aimed at students working on research projects or detailed study habits. Number 11. Packs of ruled index cards. At $1.25 for a pack of 100, this is one of the best per unit values on the entire list, especially for students using flashcard-based study methods for vocabulary, math facts, or exam preparation. Big box and office supply retailers typically charge $2 to $3 for a comparable card count. The card stock thickness is slightly thinner than premium index card brands, meaning heavy repeated handling over a full semester of studying may show more wear at the corners than a thicker cardstock would. But for standard flashcard use throughout a school year, the difference is unlikely to matter for most students. For anyone building a serious flashcard-based study routine, buying several packs now while they're in stock is a smart, low-cost way to prepare for the entire year ahead. I'd actually suggest grabbing more than you think you'll need right at the start, since running out mid-semester during a stressful exam week and needing an emergency errand just for index cards is exactly the kind of avoidable hassle bulk buying early is meant to prevent in the first place. And finally, the item a store employee specifically told me to grab before the weekend, since restocking on this one has been unusually slow compared to everything else on this list. Number 12. Expandable accordion-style file folders for organizing loose papers by subject. At $2, this is the single most expensive item on this entire list, but also one of the most genuinely useful for students juggling multiple subjects and frequent handouts throughout the week. Big box retailers sell comparable accordion folders for $6 to $10, making this one of the largest percentage savings on the whole list. The expandable pockets are labeled with basic subject dividers, and the elastic closure band holds everything together securely, even when fully packed with a semester's worth of papers. According to the employee I spoke with, this specific item has only been restocked once since arriving, compared to several restocks for other items on this list, which suggests the supplier quantity for this particular product was more limited from the start. If organizing loose papers by subject is a struggle at your house, and it is for a lot of families once the school year gets into full swing, this is worth grabbing on your very next trip, rather than assuming it'll still be there in a few weeks. I actually asked directly whether more were expected before the end of the month, and the answer I got was a fairly non-committal, hopefully, which in retail speak usually means don't count on it, buy it now if you want it at all this season. So that's the full list, 12 back-to-school items that are genuinely worth grabbing now rather than waiting, based on what's actually been selling fastest since this year's school supply lineup arrived. None of this is artificial urgency for the sake of a video. The restocking patterns employees described to me, some items replenished multiple times already, others barely restocked at all since their first shipment, reflect real supply differences that are worth paying attention to if you're trying to check items off a school supply list without multiple wasted trips. Personally, the locker organization bins and the accordion file folder are the two I'd prioritize first if you're only making one trip this week, since both had the clearest signs of limited remaining stock compared to everything else on this list. Everything else, the pencil pouches, the folders, the notebooks, the glue sticks, tends to get restocked more reliably throughout the season, so there's a bit more flexibility on timing with those. Back-to-school shopping always comes with some unavoidable last-minute scrambling, but knowing which specific items are actually running low, rather than guessing based on general seasonal urgency, can save you a genuinely frustrating second or third trip trying to track down something that's already gone. If you're heading out this week anyway, it's worth checking these 12 off the list first, before anything else on a longer shopping list. I'll also say that prices and specific stock levels can vary a bit by location, since not every store received the exact same shipment quantities this season. So if your local store happens to already be out of one or two of these, it's worth calling ahead to a nearby location before making a special trip, especially for the locker bins and the accordion folder, since those two seem to be moving the fastest based on everything I saw and heard across the 3 stores I visited. Beyond the 12 items covered here, it's also worth keeping an eye on the seasonal end caps near the front of the store over the next few weeks, since additional back-to-school items sometimes get added mid-season once the initial rollout numbers come in, and the store gets a better read on what's actually selling well versus what's sitting untouched on the shelf.